Neville Browne now. Neville's going to talk about David Gill and the Dunecht Observatory, the forgotten past of a world-class observatory. The Aberdonian David Gill was a watchmaker, but his real love was astronomy, and he became the first director of the Dunecht Observatory in 1872. Where would you may ask? In this time, one of the world's great observatories is now demolished and the forerunner of the Royal Observatory, Edinburgh. Quite a story. So without further ado, Neville, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Gerard. I'll just share my screen here.
Thank you.
Here we go. There we go. So let's bring that up to... Okay, right. Can you see that?
That's fine.
That's fine. Okay, great. Okay, well, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. I'm a fairly new member of the society. I only been here about a month and a half, but I was asked to do this talk because up here in Aberdeen we do have some interesting astronomical insights, and this is one you've probably never heard of, but you've certainly heard of the Royal Observatory, Edinburgh. Well, this is its forerunner. And this, I have to say that the David Gill has been fairly extensively researched in the past by an ex-member of the Aberdeen Astronomical Society, one of my ex-colleagues, Dr. John Reid, the late Dr. John Reid, unfortunately, professor of physics at Aberdeen University, who was very much a big fan of Gill. And the story I'm about to tell, interesting, I found out has already been in the Antiquarian Astronomer in 2014. There was a very well researched paper by Paul Haley on all this there. But I've got some new insights here. So what are we talking about? Well, here we go. So we start with talking about David Gill, who ultimately becomes Sir David Gill. But he starts in very humble surroundings in Aberdeen, and there on the left you can see the place where he was born. It's still there. That's a fairly recent photograph I took of 48 Skene Street, pretty much right slap bang in the centre of Aberdeen. And you can see there's a plaque on the wall, an Aberdeen Council plaque between the trees at the back, and I've enlarged it on the right. I've yet to tell Aberdeen Council that this is incorrect. This is completely wrong, this plaque. It said, Sir David Gill, 1843 to 1914, Astronomer Royal lived here. No, he was never the Astronomer Royal. He was a Royal Astronomer, and we'll come on to that later on, why there's a difference. Maybe I shouldn't tell them. Maybe we'll just leave it the way it is. So where does David Gill, how does he start his life? Well, he starts off in the family business, and you probably think at this point, why is he showing me a picture of a bank in Aberdeen? Well, that's because it's now a bank in Aberdeen. It's the main branch of the Royal Bank of Scotland in Aberdeen on the corner of Union Street and George Street. But it wasn't that type, it wasn't there in the time of David Gill and his father, David Senior. This was where their clockmaking shop was located. And David Senior was a clockmaker of some note. And they were a very wealthy family, actually. I discovered that they owned an awful lot of land, about 700 to 800 acres of land north of Aberdeen. So they obviously had quite a lot behind them, but it's hard to find any more detail on that. But yeah, so basically David Jr., David Gill, joined the family business and started sort of life as learning watchmaking. And in fact, he traveled quite extensively in the UK, Switzerland and France to learn watchmaking. So there was very much a desire by his father that he would become an expert watchmaker. And indeed he was, but the problem was he didn't really want to be a watchmaker. What he really wanted to be was to be an astronomer. So how can that be? Well, he was lucky enough to also, while he was doing his watchmaking, or when he wasn't doing his watchmaking rather, he was attending some classes at part of what is now the University of Aberdeen, called King's College, just to the north of Aberdeen in Old Aberdeen. It's now amalgamated into University of Aberdeen. And the famous professor of natural philosophy there, Professor David Thomson, just as a note, at the time that Professor David Thomson was the Professor of Natural Philosophy at King's College, the man who was the Professor of Natural Philosophy at the other place, Marshall College, was actually the famous Maxwell. So they had two very, very famous natural philosophers in Aberdeen at that time. Anyway, he encouraged David Gill to sort of to study astronomy in many of its forms, and particularly to use a transit telescope that was located on the roof of Cromwell Tower at the university. And you can see a picture of the quad of the University of Aberdeen with Cromwell Tower there at the back left. Now, the Aberdeen Astronomical Society know this very well, because up till 10 years ago, they used to have their meetings in the top of that tower, which was quite a long haul to get up there because there was no lift. Thankfully, we've moved now. But David Gill used the observatory on the roof at that time primarily to be able to set accurate time for Aberdeen, and he was very much encouraged to do this by Thomson. And indeed, that led to the supply of accurate time to Old Aberdeen, which was the area around the university, about 2 miles north of what is today Aberdeen, and later to all of Aberdeen, primarily through the shop that he and his father owned on Union Street. So his love of sort of astronomy and his love of clockmaking, watchmaking really came together there. That was really for the first time providing accurate time, of course, at this sort of time in the mid-19th century. However, we move on because we need to talk a bit more about, how does Gill become a famous astronomer? Well, it really starts with a collaboration with another famous Aberdonian, probably another one you've probably never heard of, which is George Washington Wilson, who was Queen Victoria's favorite photographer. And if you ever see a photograph of Queen Victoria in Balmoral or anywhere in Scotland, it's almost certain that the picture would have been taken by George Washington Wilson. But in about 1866, he was experimenting with taking photographs of the moon. He was one of the earliest photographers of the moon to get really good photographs. And he sort of collaborated with David Gill on this. So this is really Gill's sort of early introduction and some of his early work, if you like, the things that he ultimately becomes famous for. And those photographs became ultimately known to the Royal Astronomical Society, probably partly with help from William Huggins, the famous London amateur astronomer, who probably would have seen these, and we'll see in a minute he's linked to somebody else, which makes me think that this is the way that it worked. And Gill's name started to become known as a consequence of this, and he was elected a fellow of the RAS just a year later as a consequence of this. So he's becoming known, but where he really takes off is a few years later, when his amateur astronomy has brought him much more to the people knowing more and more about him, and certainly his name is being circulated as someone who's sort of an up-and-coming astronomer of some note. And this is sort of picked up by Lord Lindsay, and we'll meet him in just a minute, who is about at this point, 1872, to start building this observatory at Dunecht, just west of Aberdeen. In fact, no more than about 5 miles from where I'm sitting now. And he decides that he really likes Gill, and he says, I'm willing to offer you £300 a year to be the director of my new observatory yet to be built. How do you think about that? Well, Gill, funnily enough, didn't take very long to make his mind up, even though he was giving up an absolute fortune in the shop. But his father was very ill at this point, and he knew that his father was probably going to die fairly soon. And he really, his real love was astronomy, and he thought, well, I think I'll sell the shop and become an astronomer. And indeed, that's exactly what he did. So we need to meet Lord Lindsay. So who is Lord Lindsay? Well, we can see a picture of him there on the left. Some of you will probably be familiar with Lord Lindsay, 26th Earl of Crawford and Balcaire, extremely wealthy family. And we'll see in a minute their home at Dunecht, which was only one of their many homes, in fact. And you can see him there in his splendid red beard that he was famous for. But what he was mainly famous for, as well as being very wealthy and very well connected, was a love of astronomy. And he was extremely keen to build his own observatory. And you can see the picture on the right, which is probably, I'm guessing, probably about right, that would probably have been taken right at the end of when the observatory was there. So it's probably about 1890, I guess. And as I said before, he was very keen that David Gill should join him as the first director of this observatory, and should have a hand in what equipment was needed and also what they should build there. And it became ultimately quite a substantial building. You see, there's quite a significant cylindrical dome there. And further back, you can see, if you look a little bit further back, the significance of the building that seems to have a slit along the top of it with several sort of little things sticking out the top. That's here, if I point that out. This is very significant because we're pretty certain this is where the transit telescope was. And you'll see in a minute, that's the only thing that has any, where you can still see anything of what was there originally. So they build this this amazing observatory out in the middle of nowhere in, as I say, in Dunecht, about it's about 12 miles west of Aberdeen, I guess, where there's never been an observatory before. And it starts to become very, very well known. And indeed, David Gill starts to become very well known. Just to step back a little bit, this is Dunecht House. So this is where, this was sort of the second home, if you like, of the Lindsay family at that time. Quite a nice second home, I think you'll agree. It's still there. It's owned independently now from the land around it. The Lindsay family don't own any of the estate anymore. And the observatory was built about about half a mile to the southwest of Dunecht House. And we can see this is a map taken from the National Library of Scotland. In Scotland, we have a fabulous access to maps from pretty much any year you want, and you can get free access, download anything you want, and you can overlay them with modern maps to see where you are. And if I just go back a minute, actually, you'll see in this picture on the right, you can see the observatory ahead of you, and you can see there's a building to the right, what's today known as Hindhill Cottage, and we're fairly certain that's where the library was held for the observatory, which at the time Lord Lindsay put a lot of money into the library, and it would have been a world-class library at the time, astronomy library, I mean. So if I go forward again, you can see the footprint of Hindhill Cottage there, and you can see straight below it there, to the south of it, you can see the observatory quite clearly there, laid out on the map, and you can see the path going from the corner of the right-hand corner of Hindhill Cottage across to the observatory there. And if I go back, you can see that same path there. So what's there now? Well, on the left, you can see that same Royal Astronomical Society photograph there, and on the right, you can see the picture I took about a year and a half ago, pretty much from the same position. You can see that Hindhill Cottage is still there. In fact, on this day, it's actually three units. So 3 tenancy pieces that the cottage has been split into. And in fact, I was chatting to one of the tenants about it, who seemed to know quite a lot about it, actually. But you can see it's very clearly Hindhill Cottage that's there, but you can see there's nothing there anymore. The whole thing was knocked down, and the land that the observatory was on has been taken over with the gardens of 2 of the 3 units there. However, there is one, that's me there, by the way, in the right-hand picture, by the one thing that remains. And I was pointing out to you the transit telescope, or where the transit telescope was housed, because the one thing that's there right in the corner, right beside the corner of one of the gardens, is a stone slab which says transit circle written on it and a big cross in the middle. And the estate are fairly certain that this is where the transit circle was. And that's all there is. There's nothing else. There's no history of the astronomy. There's nothing there on the estate at all. The people that own the estate now, that's all they know about it, which is, I found a bit sad, really. But and you can see there, looking at Highfield Cottage from the other direction, you can see the stone slab there straight in front of us. That's all that's left, and that would be the sort of the northern extent of the transit circle building, with the main main cylindrical turret away to the right. So at this point, you're probably thinking, well, why on earth was it knocked down? What happened here? Well, we'll just briefly, we'll look at where David Gill lived when he worked there. He worked there for 3 years, from 1872 to 1875, which I found out quite recently, actually. There's a belief that there was a belief originally to work there much longer, but that wasn't actually correct. We only worked there for about 3 years, and this was where he lived. Astronomer's house. It's still there today. Obviously, it's not an astronomer's house anymore. It's a private house, but it's only about 200 meters from where the observatory is. It's sort of deep in the Dunecht estate, away from the main house. I'll come on in a minute, as I'm sort of leaving everything hanging here, because I'm going to wrap all this up in a minute with why on earth did this thing go away? What happened here? Well, I'll come to that in just a minute, because this is Arthur Eddington here, of course, and everybody's heard of him, and what he said of Gill's work in the future. Well, mostly he's talking here not about his work at Dunecht, but the work he ultimately went on to do after he left the Dunecht estate, because his next big job was to become the Royal Astronomer, not the Astronomer Royal, to the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, appointed by Queen Victoria. Which is why on that plaque it should say Royal Astronomer, not Astronomer Royal. And you can see Eddington's really saying some quite very, very nice things. He's saying basically that what Gill could achieve with his 7-inch heliometer, this famous sort of split lens instrument for detecting very, very accurate angular angles between stars, was on a sort of a par with the 40-inch at Yerkes and the 26-inch telescope at Greenwich at that time. David Gill ultimately dies in 1914, and he's buried back in Aberdeen. Although, as I just mentioned, from about 1879 right up till 1904, when he retired, he was actually in the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, and he ultimately then retired. In fact, I think back to Oxford before. His wish was however, to be buried in St. Macca churchyard, in the Cathedral churchyard in Aberdeen, and indeed he was. And he certainly remembered, I think by anyone that's heard of him, as being not only one of our great astronomers for the many things he did, but one of the most decorated astronomers of all time, certainly in the UK. So we need to sort of wrap the story up a little bit here, and what's happened. What's the story? Well, in order to do that, we need to introduce the character called Ralph Copeland. Now, Ralph Copeland was working at Dunecht when Gill was there, but when Gill left in 1875, there'd been a bit of a disagreement with Lord Lindsay at this point. It wasn't a nasty disagreement at all, but I think the sense was that Lord Lindsay and his wife felt that maybe Gill was getting a bit above his station. This was Victorian England, maybe not enough forelock tugging going on, etc. But and he was becoming very famous, of course. So there were many people from observatories all over Europe coming to talk to David Gill to find out what they were doing at Dunecht. It's remarkable for me to think that all these people were coming just a few miles up the road from where I am, where there isn't even an observatory anymore. But there you go. So Ralph Copeland was there, and he ultimately becomes the second director. Now, everything goes on swimmingly right up till about 1889, when really things go south very rapidly, because at this point, the second Astronomer Royal for Scotland, Charles Piazzi Smith, resigns his position at the Royal Observatory, Edinburgh, in protest at lack of funding. So it was happening back then as well. And when he goes, the government of the day decides, well, we don't really want an Astronomer Royal for Scotland. In fact, we don't even want a Royal Observatory Edinburgh, so we're going to scrap them both. So this is where Lord Lindsay really comes to the fore. So up till now, he's been funding his own observatory, which has basically become certainly one of the best in Europe, if not world class. It would have been known by places all around the world for the work it was doing. Lord Lindsay steps up and said, well, it's okay, guys, because I will fund the Royal Observatory Edinburgh from now on, and I will make sure that there is still an Astronomer Royal for Scotland. His offer was accepted, and thus Ralph Copeland, who was then the second director, and you can see him here with his fabulous beard, should become the second Astronomer Royal for Scotland. Sorry, the third Astronomer Royal for Scotland after Charles Piazzi Smith. And so what happened thereafter, remarkably, is that all the equipment at Dunecht and the world famous library, many of the people that were working there, Ralph Copeland himself, they all moved basically piecemeal pretty much to Edinburgh. Initially to Calton Hill, the old observatory at the east end of Princes Street in Edinburgh. But Lord Lindsay and Ralph Copeland had realised that was a pretty useless place to have an observatory, and so they chose to move to the southwest of Aberdeen to Blackford Hill, which of course is where the Royal Observatory Edinburgh still is. And that whole site was basically designed and built primarily by people brought in by Ralph Copeland to make it what it is today. And you know, were there not, had this not happened, had Lord Lindsay not stepped in, then who knows, there probably wouldn't be a Royal Observatory Edinburgh today with everything that goes with it. And of course, what goes with it primarily, of course, is the Institute of Astronomy from the Edinburgh University, which is a world-class, a truly world-class astrophysics research centre. And more significantly, of course, the UK Astronomy Technology Centre, which of course is where many of the UK's sort of space instruments are built, and of course where the MIRI, the mid-infrared instrument for the James Webb Space Telescope, was built. So we have a lot to thank Lord Lindsay and Ralph Copeland for in this remarkable story from this little observatory 12 miles west of Aberdeen. But there is more, because remarkably, and this was really quite remarkable, about 2 years ago, we were contacted at Aberdeen Astronomical Society, and the contact came to me because I handle all the incoming mail for the society, from a relative of the 26th Earl, a chap called Ludovic Lindsay. That's the same name as Lord Lindsay, who was James Ludovic Lindsay. I think they used the name Ludovic right through the family. And Ludovic Lindsay is the great-great-grandson of James Ludovic Lindsay, the 26th Earl. And he's the brother of the current Lord Lindsay. But what I was amazed at, he was asking us for information about both David Gill and the observatory. He knew virtually nothing, and he said the family knows virtually nothing, which I thought was quite remarkable. We gave him some basic information, which he was very grateful for. He was researching a book at the time, which was about to be published on the Lindsay family, and he wanted to put some at least some information in there about the observatory. It's a shame he didn't talk to us earlier, really, because there is an awful lot known about it, and I would have thought it would have played quite a big part in the family history, really. But there you go. So that's the story of David Gill and the Dunecht Observatory. As I say, it no longer exists, which is unfortunate. We'd really like it to be more widely known, and certainly for the current estate to at least recognise that it was there at all. But we will see if we can do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Well,
Stop sharing.
if you want to, that's great. Thanks. Neville. An ongoing story, I would imagine. So, again, if I may perhaps suggest you put something in writing for us, a bit of an article for the appropriate publication. That would be very grateful of you, if you don't mind, even if a supplement to what I think Mark did before. So
Yeah, it would be. What I would tend to do would be to sort of. It would really be an update on, on what John Reed and Paul Haley have done before. Yeah,
that's right. Okay, yeah, that would be brilliant. Thank you. Any questions from anybody? John?
Well, it's not a question. It's something that Neville may not be aware of, but in the RAS library or archives, when I was deciding on who I was going to use in this 20th century booklet chapter, I was thinking about David Gill. And in their archive, you may already be aware, there are many, there's his several of his large notebooks with his observations. There are a lot of letters from his wife.
Okay.
There, which contain a wealth of information about, all the things that wives of the time were interested in. So I thought you may not be aware of that. And might
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
No. Is that information at all available online, or is it all just in notebook?
Well, they certainly list it online, but I think if you want to go and look at them, you have to sort of go down to Burlington House and I did do that when I was thinking of using David Gill. But there's many other things there. You might want to go online and have a look and see what they've got.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah. Thank you.
Any questions for Neville from anybody? Going back to Graham's talk about the eclipse, I just wanted to make sure that Maggie's comment.
Paul Fuller's got his hand up, by the way, Gerard. Yeah.
Maggie Collins has said that with reference to, I think she means 1927 total eclipse. Should we not all be documenting our attempts to view the 1999 eclipse in Cornwall? Well, I think I wasn't in Cornwall, I was in Austria, so I did document my viewing. So I think there's plenty of documentation out there. I know the BAA produced a document for their experiences.
Yes, there is a DVD out on that exact thing, if you might want to look that up.
Sorry, who was asking the question, John?
Paul Fuller's got his hand up.
Paul, over to you, please.
Oh, thank you. You can hear me, can't you?
You're a bit crackly, but I think so, yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Neville. That was really interesting. I wondered if you'd worked out where the time gun was located. Was it at the observatory or was it at the house?
Oh, that's a good question. You mean, was it at the Dunecht House, you mean?
Yes.
No, it wouldn't have been at the Dunecht House. No, there was virtually nothing. I don't think any of the, as far as I know, nothing astronomical was at the Dunecht House. It would almost certainly have been at the observatory itself.
Oh, right. Because it was only a very small one. It only fired 2 pounds of gunpowder, which is very small.
Okay.
But I think it was only there for the 3 years that David Gill was there.
Okay.
But he had previously tried to persuade Aberdeen Council to introduce a time gun at the harbour, and he didn't get anywhere with that at all.
All right. Yeah. Oh, well, no, I didn't know that. Okay, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad this evening's become beneficial after all. So it's dug up a few more interesting resources for people to investigate. So thanks, Paul. And Neville, thanks again very much indeed. Again, I know all these presentations have taken some time and trouble to put together. So thanks very much indeed. That's very kind.